Hello, 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 and welcome back, YouTube. G-Sharp Jams here at FX Studio 2. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. Thanks for sticking in there with me. I appreciate all of my viewers. Just on today's video, we're going to do something a little bit different. I've been talking mostly over the last few weeks about upgrading your studio and things that you might want to consider, pieces of equipment that you might want to consider, and things of that nature, maintaining the equipment and just going in that direction. So today, I'm going to take a bit of a different direction, and instead of upgrading, we're going to talk about downgrading. Now, before you start thinking, he just spent the last 3 weeks talking about different areas of upgrading things in the studio and what that meant and why I should do it and how I should do it. Why now are we talking about downgrading? It's very simple. It's actually becoming a trend. Yeah. If you think about it, take a look at some of these big manufacturers that are out there. Not mentioning names, but you see it. They're either coming out with plugins now and no longer producing those big expensive hardware units. The big time 10-foot long studio analog consoles that they used to make, you're not seeing a whole lot of that being advertised anymore. They're still out there, they're still for sale, but these companies know. They know that the trend going towards the future is going to be simplified. AI is going to simplify things. There will still be a need for these big analog consoles and the big expensive pieces of hardware that you see in these studios, but few and far between will be the people that are going to be using them. There's always going to be a need for 24 tracks and 32 track projects. But let's face it, 90% of what you're hearing on the radio today is either coming from a home studio or a small project studio with some very advanced, very inexpensive equipment in it. The manufacturers know this. So maybe it's time for us to think the way that they're thinking about the future and start thinking about downgrading. Instead of trying to buy that $5,000 piece of equipment, sure, the quality may not be as great, although in some cases it is, which I discussed in a previous video. But instead of that $5,000 compressor, there's other compressors that are out there that you can get. Let's start talking about downgrading. And again, I said $5,000 and let's go a little bit lower. I don't want to confuse you and I don't want to lead you in the wrong direction here. I'm not talking about downgrading for the sake of saving money. I'm talking about downgrading for the sake of keeping up with what's getting ready to happen in the very near future. I'm talking about downgrading to save the clutter that's going up in here in your head. Because when you've got all this stuff surrounding you and you're trying to be creative, it's distracting. When you've got all those sexy, pretty lights that are blinking all the way around you and it looks really impressive to a client in your studio, guess what? It's actually distracting. And you can be more creative without all that distraction going on around you. Stand by. Check out this video. When it's done, I'm going to come back and we'll do a quick review and see if you agree with me or not. Is downgrading the actual trend of tomorrow? Stick around.
First, let's define what a downgrade means. It's not about going cheap just for the sake of saving money. It's about intentional minimalism. Producers and engineers are finding that a smaller, leaner, more efficient studio can spark greater creativity, reduce decision fatigue, and even speed up their workflow. Think of it as trading a Mercedes-Benz for a motorcycle. You lose some luxury but gain agility. One common downgrade is going from a giant analog console, like an SSL AWS 948, down to a compact analog mixer or even just a single high-quality channel strip. Big desks take up a lot of room, but now, a smaller setup sits on one workstation and can still produce high-quality sound without the maintenance and constant patching. Another downgrade to consider is in the audio interface you use. Studio owners who used to run multi-rack systems like the UA Apollo X16 are moving to simple 2-in-2-out boxes like the Focusrite Scarlett 4i4. Because not everyone is recording full bands anymore. With the availability of sequencers and samplers, having a full band just isn't necessary anymore, and 16 to 24 inputs are overkill. Smaller interfaces mean less cabling and more desk space for creative work. Microphones are another area. Microphones like the Neumann U87 are a dream mic, and who wouldn't want one in their studio? But not everyone needs that level of investment, especially if you're recording in an untreated room. Keep in mind that the U87 records exactly what it hears, so a properly treated room is important, and let's face it, most home studio owners don't treat their rooms. So what are the downgrade alternatives? Mics like the Shure SM7B or budget condensers like the Audio-Technica 4040 fit the bill. These mics handle less than perfect acoustics better and require less EQ in a mix. Next, there's the software side. Instead of juggling hundreds of plugins, yup, just like me, and don't lie, you probably do as well, many engineers are picking just a handful, like the FabFilter Total Bundle, UAD Essentials, or even stock DAW plugins. Ever start a project and spend way too much time scrolling through your list of 15 EQs? So why is downgrading catching on? First, fewer options often lead to better focus. You spend more time being music makers and composers instead of comparing gear. Second, keeping up with all those software updates can be a pain in the neck. And finally, it's about mental space. When your studio is less cluttered, your head is less cluttered. Downgrading isn't about lowering your quality, it's about removing what you don't need, so you can make the most of what you do have. What it all boils down to is this. The gear is just a tool. The creativity comes from you.
Okay, so welcome back. I think now you get the idea of where I was going with that video. And again, this wasn't talking about downgrading for the sake of saving money. This was talking about downgrading for a host of many, many other reasons. First thing that we took a look at was the high-end gear, such as a huge analog recording console. Again, sexy piece of equipment, very impressive. Somebody walks into your studio and sees that big $150,000 board sitting there, they know you're serious. Well, you know what? You can be just as serious with plugins now. There are a lot of people out there that are creating hit records using plugins. It's out there. It's definitely happening out there. So instead of looking at that big analog console, set your sights on something smaller, like the Rupert Neve Designs Portico 2 channel strip. This thing is outrageous. For a minuscule fraction of what you're going to pay for that big analog console, this thing is a channel strip with EQ and compression, stereo width, and a whole bunch of other bells and whistles. Now, clearly you're not going to go out and buy 10 of these things because they are on the expensive side. But the idea here is, well, again, we're not talking about money. We're talking about saving space, saving clutter in your studio, and giving your brain a chance to focus on what it needs to be focusing on instead of all the blinking lights that are going on around you. So, what are we looking at there? A small footprint, lower maintenance, and that's key. That's key. You know how much money it costs just to maintain an analog recording board? Over the course of year after year after year after year, it costs a lot of money just to maintain them. I'm talking about proper maintenance on these things. It's a lot of money. Let's move on. We talked about audio interfaces, in particular the Universal Audio Apollo X16. Great piece of equipment. I'm not even going to try to say anything negative about that piece of equipment. But again, what else can we do to save room, save real estate on the desk or the workstation that we have? How about that Focusrite Scarlett 4i4? Great piece of equipment, 2 ins, 2 outs. The home recording studio guy out there, why do you need 16 ins and 16 outs? What are you making? Honestly, what are you recording that you need 16 ins and 16 outs plus ADAT? What could you possibly be recording in your home bedroom studio? And even the smaller semi-professional studios, most of you don't need that much I/O in your studio. So look for something smaller. Doesn't take up so much real estate in your studio. It doesn't take a lot of space on your workstation. as big as they are, and they're making them nice and big today, and they're nice sturdy pieces that you can have in your studio. But those things take up space, and then what you're going to put on them is going to take up space, and in the end, you end up with a limited amount of space. Go with what you need. Go with what you need. Next, the microphone. Honestly, who doesn't want a U87 microphone in their studio? I mean, seriously. I want one. I've never had one. I've worked with one, but I've never owned one. For the guy working at home, or again, the semi-professional studio, do you really need a U87 in your studio? Take a look at that Shure SM7B and that Audio-Technica AT4040, even the AKG 414, which I've been using for years. And when I tell you years, I'm talking about for about 25, 30 years I've been using that microphone. And it is a tremendous piece of equipment. Consider this as compared to that U87. Something you got to keep in mind about that U87. It outputs exactly what you put into it. What it hears is what it's going to record. So if you don't have a properly treated room, all that unnatural reverb, all those humming sounds and hissing sounds, that U87 is going to pick all that stuff up. Whereas something like an AKG 414 or the Audio-Technica or that Shure microphone, it's not as sensitive to those little tiny things that are going on in the studio. But that's what makes it so good. That's why engineers love that thing, because it literally puts out what it hears. But if you're sitting in your home studio, and again, let's face it, 90% of you guys out there with a home studio do not have the rooms treated properly. You don't have acoustic treatment on the walls. You don't have bass traps. You don't have any of that stuff. Right? Right? Let's just admit it. Now you're going to go out and buy a U87 microphone and plunk down $6,000 for it, and the acoustics in that room are just absolutely horrible. Just doesn't make sense. Just doesn't make sense. Let's move on. Let's talk about compressors and EQs. Again, one box, that Rupert Neve Portico 2. Warm Audio makes some really good boxes as well. If you're like me, that studio over there, in that other room in my house, racks and racks and racks of outboard gear. Do I need all of them? At one point I did. Do I use most of them? At one point I did. What about today? I don't use a few of them. I've got a lot of stuff in there. But I can tell you, I've got, out of all that stuff I got in there, maybe 5 of them are my go-tos for certain situations. And the other ones, I just call them my utilities. Let me try this piece of gear here and see how it works, as opposed to my go-to. I got excited just like everybody else when I started this many, many years ago, and I went out there and bought everything that I could afford because I saw it on YouTube, or I read about it in mixed magazines. I got to have that thing. Well, 30 years later, yeah, I'm glad I have it because it gave me the experience in using it, because back then some of your clients wanted that particular piece of equipment on their project. But now, do I really need all of that? Well, no. Also, 3 racks. 3 racks of equipment I got in that room over there. A room in my house. It's taking up a lot of room. I'm never going to get rid of this stuff, except for the stuff that I'm upgrading. I'm never going to get rid of it, but it does take up a lot of real estate in that room that I have over there. Again, let's keep it simple. Let's downgrade. Again, not for the sake of saving money, but for the sake of saving space and uncluttering everything that's going on up here. And finally, my favorite subject, plugins. I'm going to admit it. You don't have to admit it if you don't want to, but I am going to admit it. I have way too many plugins. It's not the first time you've actually heard me say that. I have way too many plugins in my computer. It's hogging up computer space. It takes time to scroll through and find, okay, which EQ am I going to use for this and that? Although I have it pretty much narrowed down, but still, scrolling all the way down, unless it's a project that I have saved and it pops right up on the screen, it's time consuming. Let me give you a story, a quick story. Years ago, I remember this because I remember how frustrating it was. I was sitting in my home, And all day long, I had this idea that was just going over and over in my head. And I finally said, you know what? Let me get upstairs, fire up the computer, fire up the system, and get this idea down on a track before I forget it, because this is really sounding good. And as I'm getting the idea in my head, I'm getting more ideas to go around. I'm like, I'm liking this. So went upstairs, fired up my system, turned everything on, and what happened? What happened? 6 updates waiting for me for 6 of the plugins that I have. Now, if you've ever sat through an update for a plugin, sometimes they go by pretty quickly. Sometimes they don't. And if you're like me, Mr. Impatient, because I'm trying to get this track down, so let's get these updates done as quickly as possible, you're sitting there just like this. And you're watching that ball, that green ball go across the screen. 13%, 27%, 33%, 69%. And then for some reason, every time it gets to 80%, it just sits there and sits there and sits there. And it is the most annoying thing in the world. Well, 20 minutes later, when all of those updates were finally done, that fresh idea that I had in my head was no longer a fresh idea. I still had most of it. I still retained most of it. But the frustration of sitting there, being very impatient, waiting for these updates to get done, just completely blew my concentration. Who's got time for that? What's the downgrade here? Get yourself a package of plugins. FabFilter makes a great package of plugins that's going to include most everything that you're ever going to need. Reverb, compression, delay, distortion. They got it all in there. Saturation. They got it all in there. One company, one package, done. Universal Audio Essentials package, the bundle that they have. Basically everything that you're going to need. Load this thing up. One company, one package, done. And there are plenty more out there like that. What does this do? Saves you time from that annoying update that comes up every now and then. It saves you from having to scroll through your screen to find that one plugin that you're looking for when you're creating a new project, which is such a pain in the neck. Such a pain in the neck. And number 3, decision fatigue. When you have 15 EQs and 10 compressors and 5 reverbs and 16 delays and 10 channel strip plugins, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, well, which one am I going to use for this project? All right, well, you know what? I think the SSL will work good here, but yeah, I'm going to go a little bit, and maybe I'll just... who's got time for all that? Now, of course, listen, the Universal Audio Fairchild 670, I have it. If I had just gone with FabFilter plugins in the beginning, I would still go out and buy that Fairchild 670 plugin because it is just outrageous. There's no way I'm living without it. The thing is it's outrageous. If you don't have it, go get it. Go get it. It's that good. Little tip for today. That being aside, streamline. Keep things as simple as possible, because the less distraction you have going on up here, the more focus you have on what's going on in front of you. That's going to wrap it up for today. I hope you picked up something interesting. I hope this got through to some of you guys out there that have 600 plugins and have spent tens of thousands of dollars on equipment, and you're sitting in a space this cramped because you have no more room left in your studio and you can barely work. That's who this video is for. This video is also for the newbie who's out there who is overwhelmed by all the choices that are available. Guess what? You don't need all those choices. You just don't need it. Keep it simple. It'll work. Until next time, G-Sharp Jams out. Can't wait to talk to you next time. I've got some great stuff planned. I'll see you then.